I'd like to borrow today from the writer Lewis Smead, who said this, that if I had just one gift to give you, it would be the gift of integrity. So that when you come to the last chapter of your story, you could say with the psalmist who wrote in Psalm 26, "Vindicate me, O God, because I've walked in my integrity." What a way to go. You know, when the writer and the pastor and author Dietrich Bonhoeffer was almost hearing the stomping of the Gestapo boots to take him away and execute him near the end of World War II, he wondered on paper what kind of people the church was going to need most when the last bomb had exploded, the last person had been killed. And he said this, "What the church needs are not people of genius, not brilliant tacticians or strategists, but simple, straightforward, honest men and women. Bonhoeffer, we need you now." Today on Transformation, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. His name is Todd Sanders. And Todd is one of those honest, simple, straightforward men who've had a powerful encounter with Jesus Christ. His story is kind of a story that men would be drawn to, but also it's the story that we want to run away from because we want to know, can we be set free from the kind of past that Todd had? And the answer is yes. Todd's going to help us to understand what messy lives are all about from the book of Ruth as we hear his story. You're going to want to stay and hear every moment of it. We're going to be right back and we're going to hear from Todd. Well, I'm delighted today to have Todd Sanders here. Todd, man, thank you for coming.
Thanks, Pastor.
I've been looking forward to talking to you and just to having you share your story with people because I know it's going to help so many people. I'm talking on the book of Ruth on messed up lives. We've all been messed up. You'd be one of the first to admit it happened to you as well. And
Extremely messed up.
Yeah, started in the party scene when you're just a young kid, but you grew up in the Christian home, and people can resonate with that a little bit. Tell me your story. Take us to the beginning, and then we're going to move through it and get into some other parts as well.
Okay. Grew up here in the city, had a great family, two wonderful parents, extremely close to my mother, as you've alluded to, in a Christian home. Unfortunately, the church that I attended was very legalistic, if you will. I'm sure they had great intentions, but I simply could not live up to the expectations that they had put forth. I was disenchanted, very disappointed, to be honest, Mike. There were situations where I just could not live up to their expectations. And my understanding was it was about God. It's not about the church, not about the people. The last thing that the thing that really threw me in a bit of a tizzy was the fact that as I was hanging out with my quote-unquote friends in youth and Sunday school, they were told, there was one day where they were kind of standoffish to me, almost to the point of ostracizing me. And what happened was, after I inquired, they had told me, a number of them had told me that their parents had told them to stay away from Todd Sanders because he was quote-unquote of the world. That crushed me, Mike.
What were you doing at that time to warrant that reputation?
Absolutely nothing at that time. I was kind of I would be considered a popular kid. That was
like a new form of bullying, people putting you down for stuff you hadn't done, and you're only a kid.
Exactly.
Wow.
And after that, I was crushed. So I went out and I started to embrace my friends.
And you hit the party scene at a young age.
I did, absolutely. And as I went out with my school friends, we partied very young and probably, it started at 12, 13, I got into it pretty heavy.
And then you got involved in dating an older woman as a young boy, a 13-year-old. What happened, Todd?
Yeah, and I didn't realize really how bad it was, Mike, until just recently my wife and I had discussed it in great lengths. And perhaps some of my behavior had resulted in that. But what had happened was I was violated by this. She was probably close to 30 years old. I was 13 years old. She raped me. And but what happened was we continued a relationship over the period of months. It was really, really odd. But
you have an older person influencing a minor, and the head games are so hard to comprehend, but it's wrong, isn't it?
It was absolutely wrong, absolutely wrong.
But all sorts of things developed out of that. I mean, you were driving cars when you were 13.
I was driving. She had a beautiful Cougar XR7. I'll never forget, Mike. And it was.
Well, every guy would like that kind of car.
2 years old at the time, and I was in grade 9. I was dropping myself off at high school, and I was, I got to be honest, I was prouder than the peacock. I had a good-looking older woman, and I was driving the car. It was just kind of the cat's meow at the time, but
Did nobody say anything?
well, people just thought it was really bizarre, but they were, I was getting the high five. I was the kid to look up to because this was happening. I see. If I was fast forward just a little bit with that situation, we got quite involved. She was telling me she loved me, as crazy as that sounds, Mike. And I remember one day, this went on over a period of months. One day she had called me, or she got a phone call. She accepted a phone call. She started to cry. I said, "What is going on? What's going on?" She said, "My fiance is getting out of jail." I said, "Getting out of jail? I didn't even know you were involved with anybody." So she proceeded to tell me that he was in jail for aggravated assault. I'm going to be honest. I was scared, even though I was, I felt strong. I felt, I felt mature. I felt like I had everything going for me. I was scared.
This really was a messed up situation.
It was really messed up.
But things continue to happen in your life. And how did you process all those feelings afterwards as a young boy? Can you let us have a glimpse into your mind? Did you deal with guilt or shame, or was everything just cool at that point?
I'm going to be honest. I felt like kind of a cool guy, like the guy to look up to because of that stuff. But I look back now, and it's really, it wasn't a great thing. It was. I did start to feel shortly after, some shame and some guilt. As life evolved and as I got a little older, when I was 17, my mother had passed.
And tell us about that, because that's another horrific incident in your life. So she died quite suddenly?
To be honest, Mike, it was probably the single most impactful event that ever happened to me. And we were extremely, extremely close. She had a massive heart attack. And what happened was she lived 2 days. Back then, the technology wasn't there. The impact of the attack actually blew a hole in her heart. So she had surgery, did not survive the surgery.
Wow.
That was a horrible time in my life, horrible.
Yeah, you talked to me one time about the tailspin, and after your mom passed away, things actually just seemed to get worse and worse. Although what you described as worse and worse, wine, women, and song would oftentimes be what is often exonerated through music and pop culture, isn't it? Like,
Exactly.
this is what everybody wants, but in the end of the day, it left you empty?
Exactly, and you hit the nail on the head, Mike, was as God continued to work on me, as God's Spirit touched me, there wasn't a time, as I came to that chapter in my life, there wasn't a time when I would wake up after a bad night, whether it be women, whether it be fighting, whether it be drinking, where I wouldn't feel absolutely guilty and shamed and empty. Empty is a great word. So
how did you get rid of the guilt and the shame? What did you do to make it go away?
I would just kind of live with it, go do my thing, and I would get at it the following weekend. I met my wife shortly thereafter.
And this is the woman you're referring to as Judy.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
The love
Who
of my
I've
life.
met, and just an amazing lady.
Yes, thank you very much. She's the love of my life. She was instrumental in so many positive things that happened in my life.
Talk to me about that, because you guys got married, and 3 or 4 years before you had your first baby?
Yes, 4 years. Judy got pregnant with my daughter, Megan.
Now, she wasn't a religious person per se, was she?
No,
at that
Judy
point?
was just a good living person, a good living person. And she had tolerated me. She was so gracious. And just to rewind, when you had asked me if how I dealt with the guilt and everything, I would embrace my wife at that time, and I would ask for her forgiveness. And this would be repeated week after week after week. And finally, Judy, God bless her, she just told me, she said, Todd, I love you to the moon and back, but at the end of the day, stop telling me you're going to change. Just change.
As we're listening to Todd share his story, one of the things he didn't realize early on in the journey is that God was still walking with him, that God had mapped out his life, and God was bringing him back to a place of wholeness. We might say that God was bringing him to a place where he would one day become a man of integrity. And that's what God wants in your life, what he wants in mine. As we unpack the story of Ruth, we find in the 3rd chapter, and I'm going to get to it near the end of the program today, where Ruth exemplifies the principle that she is a woman of integrity. What is integrity? Well, it's not something you drum up when the need arises. It's a state of being. It implies wholeness, it implies honesty, and it implies uprightness. It's what we look for in politicians, it's what we look for in leaders, but oftentimes we're quick to let ourselves off the hook. And when we do that, when we fail to become the men and women of integrity that God created you and I to be, we disappoint people, we hurt people, and we leave carnage in our past. And as a result, we become messy people who mess up other people. That's not how God wants you. It's not how he wants me to live. And today, as we continue to hear from Todd, and then as we come and we look specifically at the book of Ruth in chapter 3, we're going to see how you and I can become people of integrity to live out the purpose for which God has called us and he intends you to live.
We had an event, a major, major event that had happened, Judy's pregnancy with Megan.
She's near the end of term, about to give birth.
Yes.
And she gets, quite sick?
She was 8.5 months pregnant, Mike. We were lying in bed. I'll never forget. It was probably 10 o'clock. She told me, she said, I'm in agony, honey, agony. I said, has your water broken? No, but I'm in agony. I said, I need to take you in. She said, yes, you do. We went into Emerge at the hospital. I recall so vividly the response I got and how upset I was. The ER doctor that was on at the time had looked at her vitals, did some basic examination, and he had determined that she had the flu. And to ice the cake, he had said that he doesn't have a magic wand. We need to go home. Wow. I suggested we get an OB because of her situation, her length of term at 8.5 months.
The doctor didn't like you telling him what to do?
No, he didn't want to be challenged, so he sent us home. The long and short of it, Mike, is 30 minutes later, we went home. She said, you need to know, dear, I'm going to die. I was not prepared for that. And so we went back to the hospital. At this time, there had been a shift change with the doctors. The new doctor that came on, he looked at her. He was quite shocked. He ordered some tests. He called in an OB. 15 minutes later, the OB came in, examined her, said, Mr. Sanders? I said, yes. He said, I have some bad news. In all probability, you are going to lose your wife and your child. Wow. I was just floored.
Like getting hit over the head with a 2x4.
Absolutely.
Where was your family in all of this, your siblings?
My family was not there at the time, but I was able to make a call while I was waiting. I told them what was happening. They rushed her to Hamilton General. They didn't have the resources to deal with it. They said she had a blood clot on her liver and she would bleed to death. So I had called my family. They met me in Hamilton.
Wow. And I remember you telling me something that they were praying. You weren't a praying person per se at that time.
No.
But what was happening spiritually? Where was God in the midst of all this?
Well, I'm telling you, it's like being in the middle of Lake Ontario. I did reach out to God.
Oh, did you?
I did. I had called numerous people. I said, my wife needs prayer. I was not prepared to lose Judy, and I didn't think it was fair to her. She was too good. She had too much going for her.
So what happened?
So what happened was they went in and I remember the surgeon had come out. They had 3 surgeons waiting for her. They took her in the room. They came out, gave me an update and said, you know what, this blood clot is gone. I almost fell over. That in and of itself was nothing short than miraculous. They said, we're not out of the woods yet. She needs to build her platelets up, so otherwise she will bleed to death.
But there was an answer to prayer, and
Oh my goodness.
and you weren't so much of a praying person,
No,
let alone a religious
no.
person, someone who had walked away from God.
Very much so. And Mike, I actually cried out to God. I screamed. I said, she doesn't deserve this, and I'm not prepared for this. Long and short of it, 20 minutes later, I had my beautiful baby girl, Megan. Wow. And the doctor even referenced it. He says, this is nothing short than miraculous.
When Todd was talking about that pivotal moment with his mother, when she suddenly died, I think one of the things that he probably was struggling with, much as you would and I would, is that life is out of control. We oftentimes want to live with the illusion that we're in control, that we're the masters of our destiny, but that was not the case in this situation. Nor was it the case when he was a young boy at 13 and being manipulated by an older woman. As we talk about integrity, Todd was on a path where God was leading him to be a man of integrity. But you know, as you and I go down that path, we also have to realize who it is that we allow to influence us. Because you see, if I want to think about how integrity is going to apply to my life, I need to realize that I become a reflection of who I'm allowing to influence my life. Todd experienced that as a young man. People influenced him, and he influenced others. In the story of Ruth, we find her now influencing the community around her by the choices she makes and the way that she chooses to live, what she chooses to do and not to do, and how she stays out of a compromising situation. I want you to know today that God is inviting you to become the man, the woman that you've always wanted to be, because He's birthed that in your heart. You can become a person of integrity. We're going to go back and hear the last part of Todd's most amazing story. But it didn't end there. You still kept partying.
Yes, toned it down considerably.
Because now you're a father.
I am a father. And Judy was very forgiving, but she wanted the change. In an effort to get that, she thought it would be a good idea to look for a church. We found a church, a loving church, embraced us like family, a great community.
So this was different than what you experienced as a kid.
Exactly.
So it had been years since you had gone back.
This is the way I thought, quote unquote, religion was supposed to be. If it's truly about Jesus Christ and His heart and our hearts to follow Him, then should be represented. We should be Christ-like, as Christians, Christ-like. This community took that to a new level. They embraced us.
You were still trying to do things in your own strength.
I was, and I kind of had adapted the same ideas as society does. I was strong, self-made, self-sufficient, when in actuality, I was weak. I was very weak.
God brought you to a point, though, where you surrendered to Him. Tell me about that.
I did complete submission, Mike, and it was just it was the best day of my life. I had some considerable dialogue with my then pastor. We had navigated some things through it, and I wasn't sure. I said, you know what, I really need to make some changes, and I want to be assured that I'm going to be with Jesus. We went through some things. I went home. I navigated. I processed them. I digested them. I completely submitted myself to the Lord at that time.
Wow. And did things change?
They did, extremely, but there was one problem, Mike. I had this lovely wife, as we've referred to, as Judy, but Judy wasn't at that point yet. She didn't have that personal relationship with Jesus. So picture this. How hard is this? Out of all the things I've been through, all the fights, all the mental anguish, all the things I've been through, I had to tell one of the most lovely, good living women that I've ever met that she needs God. Wow. Mike, that didn't go over well.
No, I can't imagine it.
She said, you pompous,
so-and-so,
and so-and-so, and many other very descriptive words, and you know what? She was right. So I
So what
began,
happened with her?
well, I began to,
Did she kick you out of the house?
no, she was still, again, very forgiving. And she says, you need to process what you're saying to me. I laid back. I began to pray very intently that there would be an event or a situation or somebody come into her life that so I wouldn't be stuck with this, trying to preach to her because she didn't want to be preached to.
Wow.
So there was a crazy conversion that I only had to put up with that to navigate that for 2 weeks, Mike.
What happened?
It was the most bizarre thing that my brother had asked me because he had known that he knew my past and knew how crazy I was. He had asked me, he had seen the transformation. He had asked me to come up to Cambridge and speak to the youth group. My prayer that day was to impact some of the youth through my story. And little did I know that it far surpassed my expectations, Mike. What happened was there was an old friend of my father's that he was a missionary. He was in Cambridge that week. He was supposed to be in the previous week, but the event got canceled. You have to listen to this. So he knocked at my brother's door. He came in. My brother, after church, we had lunch. So Clary had come in, and he had talked to my wife. They had been speaking kind of discreetly in the other room, and I knew he had a good grasp on people, a good grasp on Christ, and his impact on people's lives. So I let it go, and sure enough, you're not going to believe this. 10 minutes later, Judy had come out and committed her life to Christ. She had crossed that line of faith.
Something just happened where she realized that she needed Jesus too.
Yeah, and with the appropriate person that was able to articulate it in such a way that impacted her in a way where she would completely submit her life.
Todd, one of the amazing things about faith is that it doesn't matter if we've really messed up or if we've messed up just a little. Like you two are the contrast. We all need a Savior. We all need a Savior.
We absolutely do.
You had a dream.
I did.
Tell me about the dream, and then we got to wind up for today. But tell us about this dream. I did have
a dream. We were praying about a church coming up in St. Catharines, something that would be suitable. I had a dream one night, and guess what? I had a dream that something was going to open up that I was going to be an integral part of, and it was called North End Church. And when I woke up and I had this, I told Judy, and I said,
we hadn't even started North End Church.
No, it was...
we hadn't even named it.
No.
And you have a dream that you're going to be at North End Church.
That's right.
Why didn't you just call me up? Of course, we didn't know each other.
No, unfortunately. But yes, that was exactly how it went down.
How God aligns people. Talk to me about coincidence and chance and how God has mapped out your life. As you look back, what would you say to somebody? As
I reflect, I used to adapt the society's take on things, which is, wow, that was coincidence. Everything was coincidental. As my story unfolds, I realize very clearly that it was a picture, a puzzle. And as each event unfolded, this puzzle would get larger, and it would eventually be the picture of my life.
But you know, on any given Sunday, Todd, you're here, and you're the one to greet people, to welcome them as they come in, and you express the heart and the love of Jesus so much because you've been there, and you've met the Savior in the midst of the hole, and He brought you out of it.
In my messiness and all of my ugliness. And I tell you, we need to be there for everybody at whatever level they're at, Mike. And I love your style because that's exactly what you advocate.
Todd, thanks for being here today, love. I love
Pastor,
you, man.
right back
You're a
at
great
you.
brother. Thanks. You've heard the expression, you never believe what happened to me. Well, Todd could simply have said that about his own life. What a story, what an amazing script that one would never have imagined. You can probably say that about your own life. I know I can say it about mine as well. And in the midst of it all, we need to think about how is it I am going to live. We come to chapter 3 of the book of Ruth, and it's one of those chapters in the Bible that you say, wow, what's that all about? You'd never believe what had happened. Let me tell you what happened. Part of the culture of the day was that if there was a widow, she would find someone who was referred to as the next of kin, the closest relative. God had put a social provision in place where that person would then take care of the widow and raise up a family in honor of the deceased relative. And so Ruth discovers that Boaz is her near kinsman, her near relative. But she doesn't know that there is someone who is actually closer, a closer relative. But according to the custom, what she was to do was that in the evening time, when the harvest was finished, she was to go, and after everybody had eaten and had their fill of drink, she would lie down at the foot of the man that was referred to as the kinsman redeemer. And when he would wake up, suddenly he would begin to realize, hey, who is this woman? Now, the man had opportunity to take advantage of her, and in the story, Boaz doesn't do that. Ruth also could have presented herself in somewhat of a promiscuous way, but she doesn't do that either. She's desperately looking for someone who will take care of her. Not unlike anyone today, we want to know that we got a safety net. We want to know we have our social security. But Ruth is a woman of integrity, and she goes and lies at the feet of Boaz. As silly as the custom seems, it was the reality of the day, and she waits. She doesn't present herself in a promiscuous way, but no, she waits and she trusts for God to unwrap the whole story and to see what will come about. So often when we face situations, the temptation is to manipulate things, to turn things to our advantage. And in the end, we live with incredible regrets. Ruth is a woman who does not live with regrets. She is choosing to trust God completely. And as I began to think about her story and how she mirrors the word integrity, I realized that not only does integrity become a reflection of who I allow to influence me. Remember, we talked about that in the story of Todd. But integrity also becomes the rationale for how I choose to handle life's issues. I can answer truthfully or I can doctor the statement. And every day you and I have to make those choices. Integrity becomes a regulating valve for how you and I walk and talk. But let me say this, integrity and becoming that man or woman of integrity becomes a reality when we allow the very presence of God to control our lives. And when we do that, we can give our mess. And remember the messes we're talking about. We can give our mess to the Master because we can trust Him in that He will give us grace for the situation that we're in so that we can walk out our talk and be the people who we truly claim to be. God wants you to be a man, to be a woman of integrity. Regardless of your situation, look at the life of Ruth. Draw strength from her example, from her courage, and know that when God is with you, no one can be against you. Here at Transformation, we want you to know what a transformed life is all about. How you can experience the God that transforms lives just like Todd did. He can be the reality in your life today. And my prayer is that you will invite Him to be center, to be the Lord of your life right now.